If you've bought quarter ounce gold coins and paid between $800 and $1,200, you got screwed. If you bought silver coins and you paid between 60 and 120, you got screwed. Period. There are ways that we can help you. We can really, truly help you. And we'd love to help. If you are watching this and you've fallen into that trap, we can tell you what to do and how to get your money back.
Then as we head towards the election, some, I think, big news that came out over the weekend in, I guess, late last week was that Kamala Harris now considering price controls to keep inflation in check, and certainly something worth digging into. So I'm joined once again by Andy Schechtman of Miles Franklin for his weekly, I know it used to be the weekly physical silver retail report. Not to say that I'm not a big fan of silver anymore, although I guess we balance it with gold a bit these days as well, and certainly with what's happening in the world, maybe a little more balanced than I used to be. And of course, we will dig into silver and gold as well, but certainly the price controls, some interesting things that are being proposed there. And Andy, with that said, welcome on in. How are you today?
Good to see you again, brother. I'm good. Yeah, man. The idiocy of price controls. You know what's the old saying? If you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat its mistakes. It's happened over and over and over again. Every time it's ever happened around the world, it's failed. But maybe this time's different, right? So yeah, I think it's silly, and maybe almost as silly as blaming the grocery stores as being price gougers. I used to joke all the time, Chris. I used to say my industry might be the only industry that makes less money per transaction than the grocery stores do. I mean, they're making 1.5% commission or profit is what I heard just the other night talking about grocery stores. So,
Andy, we'll have some numbers on that today, so don't you worry.
Oh God, you always are well prepared, but it's just idiocy that, yeah, let's talk about it, because I find it to be very frustrating, and almost more frustrating that you have a naive, underinformed, misinformed public who doesn't ever lift up the hood and look underneath. They just take everything at face value.
Well, what gives the dollar its world reserve status is the fact that every country on the planet has had to own dollars since 1994 in order to buy oil. And that was the deal that we struck with the Saudi kingdom and by extension, OPEC. And now it's important to note that the Belt Road Initiative, which is the largest infrastructure project in human history, every one of the 13 producing OPEC countries are on the Belt Road. They are all lining up on the same side of the ledger. So when Saudi Arabia, as we've talked about before, first was signed a joint operation agreement with Russia, I was screaming in September of 2021, that's it. Knowing that they would join BRICS, it became very obvious that this would happen. And indeed they did. They have formally applied for BRICS. And if you realize that what has given the dollar this synthetic demand globally is the need to accumulate it to buy oil, if everyone doesn't need to hold dollars anymore because OPEC decides to open up oil production to other currencies, it is a massive, massive deal. And what did Saudi Arabia just tell us in Davos 2-3 weeks ago? We are open to accepting other currencies for oil. So this is a massive deal. Really, it's a massive deal. What it does is it will put a knife right in the heart of the US dollar and its synthetic demand and its hegemony on a global stage. It's a huge, huge, huge deal.
So let me give some dates. But in 1974 the deal was cut that the world would have to buy oil in U.S. dollars.
Correct.
And that's what Andy's talking about is they're all saying right now, adios dollars. And Andy's saying 60% today of the world's population will stop using the U.S. dollar. And that's what gives us power. So those of you who are saving those fake dollars, you're in serious trouble right now. And that's why what Andy says, and Kim will back me up, for all these years, we don't save dollars. We save gold coins and silver coins stored someplace else.
Enbridge, as I mentioned, was developed by China, Hong Kong, United Arab Emirates, Thailand, backed by the BIS. US dollars are not compatible with Enbridge, first and foremost. Saudi Arabia just became a full participant in Enbridge. There's about 25 other countries that are observing. They're called observation members. But Saudi Arabia becoming a full participant in Enbridge and the dollar not compatible with it, that's first and foremost. Number two, it is not a common BRICS currency. It is a common settlement currency, the token. Each country will trade their CBDCs. And we've been seeing that for over a year now, where China is buying soybeans and corn from Brazil, the second largest producer of corn in the world, and paying for it in digital yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange in kilo bars, which is the actual size of the unit bars in the 40% allocation. India and Russia trading with rupee and ruble. And so there might be a point where one nation says to the other, listen, I have enough of rupee or enough ruble, or I prefer, for whatever we're selling in energy or in a commodity, we would prefer the unit token. But the bottom line here is that Project Enbridge is not compatible with SWIFT. It is not compatible with dollars. It enables each and every country. And by the way, if you take the global GDP and the countries that comprise 98% of the global GDP, every one of them has a CBDC in operation or development. So they will trade their local currencies with one another, not using dollars, on Enbridge, away from the purview of the Western intermediary banks or the SWIFT. And then when it comes to settling things like energy or commodities, they will use the unit token, which is redeemable in gold. And the other 60% is gold, or is the currencies of the BRICS plus nations. And I was doing an interview not too long ago with Vince Lancy, a former commodity trader, very smart man. And he said, Andy, it is my belief that countries like China and Russia, who are massively understating the amount of gold that they acquire, even the IMF said same thing. China is not forthright on how much gold they own and are acquiring. They're buying way more than they're telling us. The lead analyst for the Bank of Montreal said the same thing. It's always been that way. For years, people would say, China misstates the amount of gold. Their numbers would rarely change. They were stuck at 1,200 tons forever, and they're the largest producers in the world. So he says, I believe these countries will do the best they can to some degree, peg their currencies, even their CBDCs, somehow, even loosely, to gold, so that it will comprise the majority of the 60% basket of BRICS plus nations in the currency side. It will require these countries to keep their monetary house in order, and all of it will be outside the purview of the US dollar. And when you realize that going through SWIFT and the SWIFT intermediary banks with the KYC and AML, the Know Your Client anti-money laundering, it takes time, it costs money, it's inefficient, and it's an old antiquated system. This is a system that will be much faster, much more cost effective, and again, will eliminate the ability of the West to sanction in what many of these countries would deem hypocritical, where Janet Yellen can say to CNN a few weeks ago, you know, we're okay with Xi and Putin being friends and allies in BRICS, but if Xi gives one penny to the Putin war machine, we will sanction their banks, their companies, and Beijing itself. And never mind the fact that we've given $260 billion to the Ukraine with no congressional oversight, Stinger missiles and F-16s, because, you know, we're the world reserve currency, so it doesn't matter. That's growing old with a lot of these countries. That is the rallying cry that is bringing them together. It is the gold and the marriage between gold and blockchain technology that is the glue, along with the cooperative manner in which they conduct themselves, that is putting and holding all of this together and growing in what is a very impressive swath of human population. This is part of the, I mean, I've thought about that. Do they want to reset the system and blame it on a villain, or can they reset it by just jacking up the price of gold? I don't know. One is certainly going to be much less painful to the populace. That would be by revaluing the price of gold. And I think they notice that. They have that certainly within their view, but it just seems that the decisions that our politicians are making are pointing us in a direction of, you know, isolation, where the rest of the world has no incentive to hold dollars, has no incentive to hold treasuries. And you know, I often talk about, you look at the United States as a place that most people growing up around the world have wanted to come and experience the freedom, the integrity of the judicial system. People have left other countries to come to America to, you know, fleeing authoritarian regimes to have, you know, justice, as that's being questioned, the electoral system, well, that's being questioned, the immigration system, that's being questioned. The lawlessness in the cities, the wokeness, everything that's going on in this country. You wonder, where the hell are we? What's happened to this great country? I see what's happening in the streets of the UK. I mean, things are upside down, and things need to change, and things are going to change. And I don't know if it'll be peacefully by revaluing the price of gold globally or not, or of a complete and total reset. You know, you look at the lead economic advisor to the U.S. government, this knucklehead named Jared Bernstein. He advocates for losing the reserve status. It's a privilege we can't afford. You look at the number two, Lael Brainerd, and if God forbid, you know, this current administration walks into the White House again, she'll be the head of the Fed. She's a modern monetary theorist. She worked at the Fed underneath Powell. She developed the CBDC with MIT, the Boston Fed. She ran Point for Fed Now, which came out 8 months ago, which is a instant settlement system backed by the Fed, like Venmo or Zelle. And, you know, who knows? She would like to see a reset. She would like to issue a CBDC. Maybe they can do it peacefully. I don't know. But to your point about the West not settling anymore, I mean, look at the $4 premium in silver to the LBMA and the COMEX price that we've seen forever on the Shanghai Exchange, which over the last 100 days, the volume has increased nearly 200%. And the combined volume of the Shanghai Metals and Futures Exchange now supersedes the COMEX, making it the number two most transacted platform on the planet behind the LBMA. We're beginning to see that these exchanges are getting more and more legitimate. And at some point, the Western system will be viewed for what it is, a Ponzi scheme. You can only manipulate a market or push a market in the direction that it is going for an extended period of time. Gold is now 120,000 an ounce. And if you want to sell it, we will pay you for that. That is what it is. In essence, it's what someone will pay for it. And it's not arbitrary. It's just what someone will pay for it.
That would drive all buyers to be paying the same price.
Correct.
And if they believe that they were in there to do it, the US can print as much money as they want to deliver those dollars for that gold, of course. In the short term, would I be right in saying they're better off doing that sooner rather than later, whilst the dollar still has some perceived value?
100%. 100%. They always say inflate or default are your two choices. How about revalue gold? And that would devalue the dollar, and that would create inflation, and there would be pain, of course, but it'd be a whole lot better than letting the entire system blow up as the world sheds dollars in favor of a BRICS currency backed by gold or whatever it is. The amount of demand that has been created for the dollar synthetically for 50 years because everyone needs to stockpile it to buy oil, if that ends and everyone dumps dollars in unison over at some point, that tsunami of inflation that would hit our shores would send interest rates parabolic to compensate for hyperinflation, which blows up stocks, bonds, real estate, the banks, and the insurance companies. Bang, that's a Klaus Schwab great reset right there. You don't have to do that if you just jack gold up. And it is the one asset that every central bank in the world probably wouldn't bitch about because they all own it. And so it would enhance all of their balance sheets as well. So I'm not saying it's going to happen. But when you hear the head of the Dutch National Bank say it over and over again, and now a senator from Wyoming say, this is how we fund our Bitcoin strategic account by revaluing the gold and taking some of those proceeds, it's not as far off and wacko as some may think. It's actually floating into the ether. My point, Miriam, to you is this. In 1942, evidently, we needed 200 million ounces for military. The munitions and the stealth bombers and the aerospace and the submarines and all of this stuff that's high tech evidently doesn't need silver anymore. Yet the consultant for the DOD told me it does. The gentleman who helped design the Patriot and the Tomahawk missile told me it does. And it needs close to 500 ounces. Think of all of the munitions that we are selling and producing. Look at the $5 billion we just stole from Russia to provide it in the form of weapons given to the Ukraine. Who makes those weapons? Military industrial complex does. That's the puppet master. They're pulling the strings above Biden and the presidency. These are the most powerful people in the world. And I would simply submit this, that why the heck would the four biggest Western commercial banks and then the next four biggest, there's a massive position just on four banks. And then you add the other four, it's the largest concentrated short position in any single commodity the COMEX market has ever seen. And yet the Silver Institute omits any and all mention of military uses for silver. So why would these banks be suppressing the price of silver? because it's needed by the military industrial complex. And if the military industrial complex doesn't have silver, they don't make high-tech weapons. And then they're not able to do what they do. So my feeling is that there is a concerted effort by the very powerful people to hold down the price of silver, yet they're losing that battle because it's being accumulated by countries like China and India in a way that the world has never seen, and they are gobbling up all they can. And China right now is listing silver at $4 an ounce higher in Shanghai than in the West to arbitrage whatever silver is able to be accumulated on the Western exchanges and delivered to Shanghai. They are slowly and methodically accumulating as much as they can, arbitraging as much as they can, using this brain dead suppression of the West against us. There will come a time when silver fully accentuates and is known by everyone as being maybe the most undervalued asset on the planet. And I do believe that for those people who have the foresight and the strong fingertips to hang on, silver represents what I believe is the value of a generation. And this is why, because you can only manipulate the market for an extended period of time by pushing it in the direction that it is going. Rising prices are a symptom of inflation. It's the irresponsibility, fiscal policy, and brain dead monetary policy of the Fed and of the government that are creating these distortions to begin with. And it just goes to show how uninformed the public is, and certainly how uninformed someone like Kamala Harris is in saying this nonsense. I mean, just looking at it alone, just the cost of farmers to process, package, and deliver their food has gone up 31% since she's taken office as the vice president, and yet she's blaming it on grocery stores. I used to joke that this industry might be the only industry that makes less than the grocery stores, who make on average 1.5%. They're not the problem. The problem is through all of the inputs that have gone up in cost, fuel and seed and certainly fertilizer, most of which comes from Russia, and all of these input costs have gone up, and blaming it on and then trying to impose capping prices. You go back to the 70s and you read about that, you'll see that farmers had price caps on chicken, and the cost of raising baby chicks to the point where they could then, at a full-grown chicken and slaughter it and bring it to the grocery store, it cost more to do that. So they were drowning baby chicks, killing them, because the cost of raising them to adulthood and then bringing them to be processed costs more than they were allowed to sell them for. All that does is create empty food shelves and distortions, and people drop out of it. It's communism. It's socialism. Capitalism says a company that can do it more efficiently and do it better, well, they win. And if you can do something more efficient for less money, that is the whole concept of capitalism, bringing value through efficiency instead of imposing, the government's will. And all that does is distort everything that they trust. It's a bad omen that is a path that she is taking, rather than looking within and saying, geez, spending $100,000 a second 24/7 might be the real problem. Wasting our money all around the globe on initiatives we have no business being part of, or wars we have no business being part of. Well, maybe that's something we should look at. Instead, blaming the people who are running grocery stores at tiny margins. How about the margins we see on Wall Street? How about the margins we see other places? It's misdirected, and it's ignorant, and it's very troubling to me when you think about what could be if this administration takes power and starts implementing price controls like that. You'll end up with empty grocery stores and grocery store chains going out of business, and vilifying these people who are so crucial to everyone's life is just not the way to do it. Instead, look within, and that probably won't happen, but that's where the root problem is. All these grocery stores have all of the supply chains and all of the relationships with the producers already in place. So you're right. You're not going to get the choices. You're not going to get the quality. It's a lesser option, but it wouldn't surprise me if this current administration retains power. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see things like that, but I don't think it's the solution whatsoever. The solution begins with reining in government spending and money creation. That's where it starts. And trying to intervene in free market capitalism will end badly. And it will end badly for the people who can't afford for it to end that way. Worse, the poor will have, less options, less availability. And, you're looking at the rural areas, these grocery stores who can't stay in business. If they shut down, then what? Then what do? You travel 50 miles to go get your food. So these things are very bad. And just turning our back on what made this country great, like capitalism, like inspiring ingenuity and efficiency, you throw that all out the window if it's price capped, and it will end like every other price capping endeavor ever has, poorly. So even if you get a government sponsored or a co-op style grocery store like that, yeah, your options and your quality and all of those things will be massively compromised to a company like Kruger's, who has been making 1 or 2%, if they're lucky, all of these years. And you look at it compared to what greedy Wall Street bankers make, or other industries, even in insurance, the insurance brokers are making 7 or 8% on selling insurance product. Why aren't they considered greedy when they're making 3-4 times what a grocery store chain is? It's just ignorance and bad precedent, really. I hope for all of our sakes that this isn't the path we go down.